Sieva to join us for this morning's first conversation. Sieva, if you could, would you mind just starting with the obligatory background story? Who are you? What's Enduring Ventures? How did you get here? Kind of catch up those that are unfamiliar with your story with maybe the 2-minute overview, if we could.
Sure. So I run a firm called Enduring Ventures. We're a long-term holding company. Surprise, surprise. We're entrepreneurs by background. So I spent about a decade building tech or tech-adjacent companies, first in education, then in healthcare, and I sold that business. And my business partner is similar. He's built a couple of much larger tech companies than me. And one day he came to me and he said, hey, I know you love Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Why don't we start a holding company, like a little baby Berkshire Hathaway that we pursue, for the rest of our lives? And that's how we started Enduring Ventures. And it's been an incredible journey since. We own a little over 20 companies now, 3 of which we started, but everything else we've acquired. And it's across HVAC, plumbing, broadband, marketing agencies, tech companies. And it's been a really fun journey so far.
Just a little more context on that. So as founders, you guys are 50-50 partners, and over time you've raised some capital. Can you put just slight context to how the business has grown, your relationship? I think the topic of 50-50 partnerships is one that's interesting. I'm in one. It's fantastic. Some people don't love them. I think you guys have talked about that a bit. Could you just put some color on that topic for us briefly?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today was how important it is to constantly increase your surface area of luck. And that's basically my job as an investor. When I think about return on investment, I think, how can I increase luck? And if I can increase luck, then I will have better returns for me and my investors. I think meeting the right business partner or picking the right business partner is the most important thing you can do, right? And I guess I will first caution and say that as I go down this path and tell you a little bit about my business partner, the normal deduction that people have is, oh, I need to go find a business partner to start my company and then it's going to be great, like Sieva said. And the reality of the situation is a mediocre or bad business partner will cause you more pain than going alone. So priority number 1, go alone. If you can find a business partner like my business partner, definitely hitch your wagon to them, because you're gonna end up in a much better situation. So just real quick, I met Xavier like 8 years ago. We went to a conference together. It was a invite-only entrepreneur conference. I was kind of the bottom of the totem pole at that conference, but there was 100 people in the room. And when I snuck into that conference, I was now amongst really, really interesting entrepreneurs like Xavier. And he'd built some really cool companies. He built one of the largest book-selling businesses on the internet that he sold. And then he flew to Africa and looked around and said, he was in a village in Tanzania, and he looked around and he said, there's no light in this village, and people are using kerosene to light their homes at night. So what he did is he started a solar company in Africa and lit the homes of millions of people, raised hundreds of millions of dollars, lit the homes of millions of people using solar in the home. And I was like, man, I need to be like this guy when I grow up. I need to get as close as possible to him. And we became friends. And many years later, that's when he came to me and he said, hey, we should start this holding company idea. So if you meet a person like Xavier, it'll change your world. It has certainly changed mine. But I would just say proceed carefully, right? Find a way. If it's a new business partner, somebody you met here, somebody you met at a different conference, find a way to work together for 6 months, a year, work on a project together. Don't overthink the partnership or the economics at first. Really give yourself some time to get to know each other.
So we're going to dive into this concept of manufacturing luck and increasing your surface area for opportunities. What are some things you can point to where you've been lucky?
I've been very lucky. I feel very lucky in life, that's for sure. There's the things that are like, this is luck that you don't control, right? My mother came to the US when I was a baby. I had nothing to do with that. And that was a huge move for my whole family and generations to come, because she came from the Soviet Union, and it sucks there. You couldn't have a business, and it's still not great. But the US is an amazing place to build a business, to get educated, to build a family. So that's the type of luck I don't control, that I'm really grateful for. But we can talk a little bit about luck that we do control. And I feel like there's so many points in my career up to this point where I have been lucky. And I want to think about it. I guess I want to answer that question kind of on two levels. Level one is the micro, right, on the business specific level. And level two is on the macro. And you actually had a really interesting tweet that made me think a little bit about this last week, which was, it was something like, most businesses are average. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, most businesses are average. Like, they are distributed along a normal curve, like a bell curve, right? But we all think our business is special. And I like that tweet because it took me years to realize that truth. But when you realize that truth, it sets you free as a capital allocator and an investor, because that's what everyone is in this room, or aspires to be. You're not just a business owner, you're allocating capital in the most efficient way. And when you realize that most businesses are average, it allows you to think in a different way. So I'll share kind of my personal story around this. In 2000, so in college I started this little education company. And in and around 2014, that business was growing really fast. And then all of a sudden it slowed down, and it went from growing, a couple 100% a year to like 10% a year. And I was beating my head against the wall, trying to solve this problem, wanting it to grow faster, and thinking to myself, this is the best business in the world. I need it to get bigger, because I had no other options. And right around then, I read Snowball by Alice Schroeder. And I would assume most people in this room have read it. It's the biography of Warren Buffett. If you haven't, please read it. It's incredible. And I was reading Snowball, and I'm thinking to myself, Warren has this Berkshire Hathaway mill, and he's taking money out of this company that isn't growing, and he's putting it in a different company, and then he's putting it into blue chip stamps, and he has these 3 different widgets that are making, like, you put in $1, this one makes $1. You put in $1 in the second one, this one makes $2, and so on and so forth. And I just have one widget. I just have my little shitty education company that's not growing anymore. So every time it creates a profitable dollar, I'm taking the dollar and I'm putting it back in my one widget. And that was kind of the end of that thought. I was more just envious, I think, of Warren at the time, and didn't know what to do with that. But many years later, when Xavier came to me with this idea of starting a HoldCo, I said, a light bulb went off, and I said, oh yeah, I've actually been wanting to do this forever, because I know it'll increase our surface area of luck, and that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
Are there any, you mentioned Warren Buffett, are there any other lucky entrepreneurs that have kind of inspired you in this process?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I actually think a little bit more of anti-luck when I think of luck. Charlie Munger has this quote. He says, invert, always invert, or I want to know where I'm going to die so I don't go there. I guess who in here, how many people here know who Rick Guerin is?
Anybody? One? I see one hand.
Okay, that's great, because I guess how many people here know who Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett is?
Everybody's hands up.
Okay, great. So Rick Guerin was the third partner of Berkshire Hathaway in the early days. And
he messed up.
Yeah, he did. And a few years ago, Warren Buffett got asked, hey, there was that guy Rick Guerin in the early days. He owned a pretty big piece of Berkshire. What happened to him? And Warren said, Rick Guerin was incredibly smart, but he was in a hurry to get rich. And what happened in the 70s is basically Rick Guerin had a large position in Berkshire, but he was also levered on most of his positions. And in the 1970s stock crash, he got margin called, and he had to sell his Berkshire stock back to Warren for $40 a share. So, that's one of kind of a few examples that I think about where Rick could have been worth 80, even if he owned 10% of that business today, he would have been worth $80 billion, right? So in one foul swoop, he went from being incredibly smart and owning the right thing to losing everything. So kind of lesson number one is don't put leverage on your main thing, You can use leverage thoughtfully, but don't use it in a way that it can destroy you. And I guess I do want to talk about maybe a couple more people on the anti-luck front. So, and kind of what I've learned from them. I don't know if anyone here in the room is from Thrasio, but let's talk about Thrasio for a second. Do we have any Thrasio people?
I don't think so, but it's a name I know well.
Okay. So Thrasio is an aggregator of Amazon businesses. And I won't speak negatively about them. I'm sure they have an incredible team and an incredible business. But I do want to bring them up as one of my lenses of anti-luck on business. Thrasio is buying Amazon-only businesses and aggregating them using quite a bit of leverage. So the points of anti-luck for me with Thrasio are they're platform dependent, right? Their entire business is dependent on Amazon. So if something changes, that could hurt their core business. They're extremely levered. They're competing in a worldwide competition, right? If you're selling a face cream on only Amazon, then everybody in the world, somebody in India and Pakistan, somebody in South Africa, can compete with you on that business. There's effectively few to little rules on Amazon. And in their core business, they have to acquire to survive. I don't know how Thrasio is doing. I know Silver Lake put $1 billion into them, and those people are much smarter than me as investors. But I will say that they're stacking, I wouldn't want to do that business because they're stacking a lot of chips in the anti-luck category. So when you ask about surface area of luck, it's for me, it's how do I reduce platform risk? How do I reduce my competition from worldwide to just local, minimize leverage, et cetera?
On the topic of manufacturing luck or anti-luck, is there anything tactical? So we talked strategic, leverage, deal flow, things like that. Is there anything in the boring parts of the company, HR, operations? Do you think about luck in those parts of the business at all?
I do, but at our holding company level, it's really how do we make the key decisions that trickle down to the rest of the company? And for me, it's all about the CEO when it comes down to the tactical stuff. So we kind of float around here at the top of the holding company level. That's me and my business partner. And then at each individual company, whenever I find myself digging into the day-to-day operations, things like HR or marketing or sales or whatever it is, I have to take a step back and really assess the CEO of that business. Because if we have a world-class CEO, then I don't find myself getting involved in the ops. And if we don't have a world-class CEO, then I get very involved in the ops. And at the end of the day, the most important thing I can do is pick the right CEO and incentivize them properly. So the ways that we can increase our probability of success is incentive alignment, right? One thing that I really learned the hard way last year is we hired a CEO who we paid well, and we aligned their bonus with the company performance, and then we also gave them equity. I come from the tech world where you just kind of give people equity. It's part of their job. They vest into it. And I have now learned the hard way that that's not a great idea. The right way to give equity is by aligning the executives' upside incentives and downside incentives. And what I mean by that is if I just give equity to somebody, then they benefit from the upside. However, if they buy into the equity just like an investor would, then they both participate in the upside and they participate in the downside.
You mentioned 20 some odd deals within Enduring to date. What are some, after 20 deals, there's probably some some scars and some mistakes and some lessons learned. Are there any beliefs that you have about M&A now that you're looking in the rearview mirror at 20 transactions?
A lot of beliefs. I actually keep and for those of you that are just getting started, I recommend this. I keep a running deal log of, it's got to be like 15 pages now, of all of the mistakes that we've made along the way for every single company.
Let's dive into this. What's the format? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a Word doc?
It's just a Word doc. It's just a running Word doc that says, here's the name of the company, here's what we did, and here's what I would do differently next time. And it goes everything from like the diligence process to questions asked in that diligence process to how we structured the incentives of the deal to lawyers and service people that we've worked with. And then usually most importantly, it's an assessment of the company, right? This is what we thought when we bought the company, and this is ways that we were wrong, with the hope that the next time we do a deal, I'm going to read through that document and skip those mistakes.
I want to pick into a few specifics. Is this only for deals you've closed, or is there any lost transactions that are in there as well?
No lost transactions. The reason there's no lost transactions is because I think before we buy a business, we know 1% about the business. And the day after we buy the business, we know like 85% about the business, for better and for worse. And I guess like
84% is a big spread.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we should do better diligence. You asked me a question about like what are some beliefs. I think belief number one, I just looked at my list and in big bold letters, it was you got to get in the pool. So if this is something Xavier and I talk about, like if you haven't bought a business yet, and you're just kind of circling around the hoop, looking, like do yourself a huge favor and just buy a business. Don't buy a bad business, like make sure you protect your risk. But you just have to take that step because, like I just said, no matter how much research you do, you just know a tiny fraction of the work that has to be done.
Are you ever going to publish the 15 pages? Can we get this in an ebook, or is there a printed version?
I think I will. I might sanitize it a little bit. I
hear there's a publishing company that can help you with this.
Yeah, that's right. I'm happy to talk about that.
We're doing that next.
Okay. Those lessons are like written on that piece of paper in my blood, So like, one, I remember them really well, but two, I'm like deeply embarrassed by a lot of the things that are on that sheet. I think I'm getting over it. I always say like, I am 10 times the investor I was just 2 years ago. And I'm excited to be 10 times the investor I am today. I just know how embarrassed I am about the person I was very recently.
If you're willing to publish yours, you're a bigger man than me. I would not want mine out there. So good for you. We mentioned publishing, and you guys recently did a little transaction. Can we talk about that for a minute? Maybe any details or stories or anecdotes from that?
Yeah, sure. And we're going to announce a CEO for a CEO that I'm really excited about for an acquisition that we just got done. We're going to announce it today.
Do you want to do it right now?
I'll definitely tell you guys.
I don't think anybody's live tweeting this. It's just between us.
Yeah, big secret. Let me think.
Let's start with the company. When did you buy it? Let's go back in time.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about how I found out about this company in the first place.
Great.
So, in 2015, I met a guy named Tim Ferriss.
Who is he? I've heard that name.
Yeah, there's no way he remembers who I am, but I remember who he is. Anyways, so I used to share. I was in San Francisco working on my little education startup, and I used to share an office with Sam Parr, who started The Hustle and now does My First Million. And it was basically like an apartment, like a 2-bedroom apartment. He worked out of one apartment room, and I worked out of the other room. And he was just starting The Hustle at the time. And Tim Ferriss showed up at the office because Tim Ferriss had just recently invested in The Hustle. So I wasn't really meeting with Tim Ferriss. I was just kind of loitering, and Tim was meeting with Sam. But I distinctly remember him telling this story around how at the time he'd already published The 4-Hour Workweek, was incredibly successful. then the 4 Hour Body, and he was working on another book. And we were kind of like asking him questions like, how do you think about content? How do you think about media? Why are you publishing all these books? And he said that he makes virtually no money on his books because the publishers keep like something like 90% of royalties. But the books open doors for him to get meetings on other interviews, podcasts, media, etc. And through that, he promotes his podcast and his newsletter, and he makes a ton of money on his podcast and newsletter. This was already like 8 years ago. I assume he's much, much bigger now. And that was really interesting to me because I think I was like 25 at the time with, just kind of like hoping to get a little bit of credibility in the world. And I thought to myself, oh, that's really interesting. Like, this guy publishes books to get credibility. Maybe I should publish a book to get credibility. So I went to my friend Sean, I told him this story, and immediately we were like, yeah, let's do this. We're going to write a book. We're going to interview super smart entrepreneurs. We're going to publish it, and kind of by default, we're going to kind of seem credible and interesting through that. Ultimately, that dream kind of started to fizzle, and we didn't do it. And the reason we didn't do it is because like we were too busy. We were running our startups, and I think writing a book was just like incredibly intimidating, right? It was like you have to come up with the idea. How do you come up with the strategy? Who's going to edit it for you? How do you put something into the world that you're truly proud of? And that leads us to this acquisition that we just made. So about 3 months ago, I got a message from a guy named Eric Jorgensen who wrote a book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And he became quite famous, I think, through this book. And the way he did it is he worked with this company called Scribe. He wrote quite a bit of it. Scribe edited it for him. Scribe did the layout, and then they published the book. And now he was doing his second book, and he reached out to me, and he said, hey, man, this company called Scribe that published my book is struggling. They've been profitable for many years. They're the leading brand in this industry. And I think the CEO made some mistakes. Can you guys kind of save it? Can you take a look at it? So we did, and we got closer to this business, and we realized that the CEO had way overhired, had made some kind of pretty chronic management mistakes. He didn't have a CFO or anything. But underneath, there was this incredible brand, this incredible business that used to be very profitable. So we bought it a few weeks ago, and it was a bit of a messy process. You're happy to, you can totally corner me at some point. I can tell you a little bit about this business because the lender had taken it into bankruptcy, had basically foreclosed on their
Favorite way
assets.
to do a deal is through the lender.
Yeah. It's definitely a cleaner way when there's a messy situation going on. So I'm happy to talk about that at some point. But basically, we bought this business called Scribe. They've published the books of thousands of authors now, like a bunch of Fortune 500 CEOs, people that are coaches, lawyers, accountants, anybody who wants to get their ideas heard in the world, anybody who wants to leave behind a legacy or build their credibility for their business is using this service. And they've even done the books of some really famous authors like David Goggins, who sold 5 million copies through them, Chris Voss, who has an incredible book on negotiation, and Nassim Nicholas Taleb is also a customer. So we're super excited about it. And actually, Xavier had a genius idea of asking Eric Jorgensen to actually be the CEO of this company. So that's who we're announcing today. I think he's going to be an incredible fit for the company. He's been doing it for the last few weeks.
Congrats. That sounds like a great deal and a great choice for a CEO. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, we're stoked.
I want to wrap up with just one or two last things, then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So for those of you that are itching to ask Sieva something, get some questions ready. I want to kind of wrap up with this. In our notes from our prior conversation, we talked about the Pareto principle in HoldCos. You've talked a little bit about that and some of the things you've written about, interviews you've done. Can you kind of dive into that 80-20 rule and how that applies to this business of holding companies?
Yeah, sure. So I research a bunch of holding companies. I love it. I'm a huge nerd about it. I'll read biographies or kind of financial public statements, listen to as many founders' podcasts as I can get my hands on. And one thing that's come to light for me is that everything in life follows the Pareto principle, which is the rule of 80-20, right? 80% of your value is going to come from like 20% of your effort, or in this case, 20% of your companies. And the two companies that come to mind, two great companies, by the way, that come to mind are one that just went public, as many of you know, Andrew Wilkinson's company, Tiny. Great company, great team there. And if you look at their public filings, you'll notice that their Meta Labs business produces like 30 million of EBITDA. It's a beast for them. And then Dribble is a business that does, I think, tens of millions of ARR for them as well. But then the next business down, and I think they own like 100 businesses, or like maybe 60 businesses. The next business down is a huge step down from those two. So what you really notice is that there's two businesses that are driving the valuation of the Tiny Corporation, which is like an $800 million value company. And I'm confident they're going to keep compounding and building that. But I think that rule applies to most holding companies, and we're starting to see it form in ours as well. I want to tell, I don't know how much time we have. Can I tell one more story? One of the more interesting holding companies that I like to study is the Lowe's Corporation, started by the Tisch brothers. So
Is this the home improvement chain?
what's that?
Is this the home improvement chain?
It's not actually.
It's not. Okay.
Also called Lowe's. It's the family that started Lowe's Hotels, and then Lowe's Theaters, and now owns the Lowe's Corporation. So I think I'm just looking at the dates. Yeah, that's right. So their story, their story is one of 50 years, right? They've been buying businesses and growing businesses for a very long time, actually maybe 60 plus years now. But their story really starts in the 1950s. First, they buy a hotel in New York, and that business is just okay for them, and that evolves to become Lowe's Hotels today. But their first big coup is Lowe's Theaters. In the 1950s, there's a really interesting law that passes. It's an antitrust law that the government passes down that says movie production companies can't own theaters. Okay? And at the time, basically, the movie companies had been making their movies and showing it in their own theaters. So all of a sudden, all of these movie studios have to sell their theaters. So MGM has to sell 100 of their theaters called Lowe's Corporation. And the Tisch brothers buy these theaters in a fire sale. And that becomes their first coup. And instead of kind of reinvesting in these theaters and doing something interesting with them, the reason they buy these theaters is because they notice that it's on extremely valuable land in all of the biggest cities. So they don't reinvest in the theaters at all. Instead, what they do is they just partition off the theaters and they just sell them and make a ton of money. 15 years pass, they buy a few other businesses. And in the 1970s, I think like 1974, there's a business that becomes distressed, a very large insurance company called CNA Financial. It's a business that does $4 billion in revenue that's losing about $100 million a year that they buy for $100 million. So they go in, they buy this business that's doing $4 billion a year for $100 million, and they immediately start taking it apart. They separate the core casualty and life insurance business, which is the kind of the honeypot that makes all the money, and then they spin off everything else. The company owned like nursing homes and like dental care and like a home builder that was losing a bunch of money. And they turned that acquisition into what is today about $2 billion of EBITDA for them. So if you look at Lowe's Corporation today, as a whole, they make like $3 billion of EBITDA in any given year, plus or minus. If you look at CNA Financial, they make like $1.7 billion per year. And Lowe's Corporation is a company that owns hundreds of companies. So you can really see how one or two meaningful moves in your life can really change the course of your company and career.
Power laws are quite real.
Yeah.
Let's open it up for Q&A. I will repeat anything. Does anybody have any burning questions for Sieva and the Enduring Ventures story? Awesome question. Thanks, Stephen. So the question, just to summarize it, is about partnerships and age gaps between partners and where the dynamic of partner and mentor may evolve. Have you seen that at all in your business or in any businesses you've studied?
Yeah, I wish he was sitting here so we could both answer that question. That'd be fun. I'm curious like where he thinks the mentor line stopped and the partner dynamic started.
Let's call him.
Yeah, exactly. Call a friend. So I think in the first 2 years, it was like 80-20, right? He was mentor,
80-20 mentorship.
mentorship. He just has so much more experience with me in experience than I did at the time with company structure, finance, fundraising, debt structure, et cetera, that I would have never been able to get out the gate that fast. It probably would have taken me another 5 years to learn what I got to learn in the first like 12 months or so from Xavier. So, for example, like
We're back to the topic of luck now.
yeah, exactly. Like he massively increased my surface area, but like marrying Xavier in our business partnership massively increased my surface area of luck for everything that I'll do for the rest of my life, right? If you can pull forward 5 years of learning into one, that's a tremendous amount of compounding, right? If you can do that just a few times, you've basically pulled forward 10 to 15 years of growth into just a few years. So he's the one who proposed the holding company. He's the one who proposed the structure, and he wrote the legal documents for it. And if, by the way, if you're interested in those legal documents or that structure, feel free to reach out to me. He's now starting to share it with people. He's kind of like templatized it, sharing it with folks to kind of help them in their HoldCo journey. So in those first couple years, he was carrying the bulk of the weight. And then at some point, I grew into my kind of confidence and experience, and I realized this is going to be a better partnership if we're both pushing and pulling for every deal. And I think that's where we are today. We're really at a 50-50. We learn from each other. We're running in different directions on deals and bringing them back and challenging each other. And we have a very, by the way, we have a very healthy, challenging relationship. Oftentimes, we'll take totally different positions on a deal, and viciously is not the word, but maybe like passionately negotiate our positions until we end up in a happy medium. So hopefully that answered your question.
Awesome. We got time for one or two more. Go ahead. So what drives the 80-20? Is it asset quality? Is it executive leadership and CEOs? Is it pure luck? Is there anything you can hone in on why that occurs, where you get this runaway business?
Yeah, my second learning in M&A is hindsight is 20/20, which I think everybody knows. And it's easy to connect the dots backwards, but when you're in there making the decision to buy a company,
Those pro formas always go up and to the right every time.
they work perfectly, it seems. When you're in there looking to buy the company, you feel like you know a lot, but years later, again, you look back on that decision, you realize, like, I didn't know anything, relative to how much you know. And do you feel the same way about your companies?
100%.
Yeah. So when you look at companies that Warren Buffett bought, like See's Candies or Amex or Geico, I think at the time he had a very intelligent decision, but it's only years down the line that he got to look back and say, this is what made this company outperform. And I feel the same way about your question, basically. Like, we do our best to do good diligence, to only buy businesses that fit our buy box, and then to place incredible talent. Those are all things that increase our surface area of luck on the micro of that business. But we don't know whether this is going to be a 20% of our portfolio value until like 12 months later. 12 months later, we can look at that business and say, oh yeah, the cash flow dynamics are incredible, and this leader has proven that they can push through difficulties despite industry trends or norms or whatever challenges they face. And when those two things come together, you get a magic company.
Awesome. We have time for one last one. What is the definition of luck for you, and what have you based that on?
I once heard that there's an equation for luck. It's where P plus O equals L, where preparation plus opportunity is equal to luck. So if that is the case, then my life goal basically is to increase how prepared I am and increase the number of opportunities that I get, so that when I get that opportunity, I'm prepared, and therefore I will have luck. And a couple ways that I've done, and you guys are all doing it here, right? Like, opportunities are in this room. Like, I met my business partner at an event like this, and we just happened to go to an event together, and then we had dinner together. And my main action there was that I asked for his phone number very awkwardly at the end. Like, I remember standing in the dining room being like, hey, like, do you want to be my friend? Can I have your phone number? Oh, man. So I recommend you guys do that as well. You know, like, when you're out, like, wake up early, go to the workout events, talk to the person next to you. Like, don't just kind of sit in your pods today. Like, after my talk, introduce yourself to the person next to you. At the end of the day, get their phone number, message them in the app. Be kind of that, like, weird, awkward person at this event, because that's what these are designed for. So that's one way that I've created luck.
And then overnight success, 8 years later, you're on the stage.
Exactly. You never know. And then the other way that I've really created luck has been creating content, right? I talked about book publishing earlier, but some of you guys have mentioned you follow me here on Twitter. I follow Kelsey on Twitter. And by sharing content, by sharing your story, you are attracting more opportunities, right? You are attracting the types of people that care about your story, that care about what you're doing. And therefore, you are more likely to get lucky. And then, you know, luck for me really is value creation for my investors. Like, the output is, am I making more dollars as fast as I can for myself and my shareholders? But I also think about luck in, like, my relationship, like the way I met my fiance or the way I hang out with my friends. I think that equation applies to everything.
Amazing. Sieva, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And thank you for sharing all this.
My pleasure. This was fun. Thanks, man.